integration. Please welcome our speaker.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, so I'm going to spend about 45 minutes going through the government trial projects, essentially, particularly the areas of procurement and looking at the changes that they've made. I'm going to do that. I'm going to sort of give it the context of talking around the government's construction strategy, looking at the task group of the procurement and lean client and the report that they created and the subsequent trial projects that they oversaw and are ongoing for now. And then we'll go into some question and answers. That's me. If you want to tweet anything, quite happy to use my hashtag or use that hashtag there through the session. Andrew's giving you a little bit of context to me. This is my graphical summary of me, as I say, 20 odd years in industry, working for clients, working for contractors and consultants. So I did see sort of the full life cycle of the projects in that. And as I say, I'm now working at the university and I have been for the last 4 years. In terms of the thing that I want to get you to think about whilst we're doing this and whilst I'm going to set this up around the government's construction strategy, there's a key question, okay? Why has all this happened? And will the recommendations that have been put forward by the government for public sector procurement actually be adopted by industry? So I'm going to tell you a load of stuff, okay, and it's reasonable, but what's going to happen with it? Is it going to change anything, and what's going to be the outcome going forward? So we'll look at that, and that will be the question that we come back to at the end. And I'm going to sort of set that in the context of this book, one of my favourite books. If you don't like reading heavy books, then this is one of them. So John Cotter is a change management consultant, very much focused on his model, the Cotter's model of change. And we're going to use that to actually see how the government have actually gone through their process for adopting change, and we'll see how they've done on that basis. So, I said we'll start with the government's construction strategy. Let's have a look at that. Probably start with that graphic. Why the government construction strategy? Do we need another report about construction? There have been plenty in the past, and as this timeline shows, going all the way back to the Simon report in 1944 and continuing up until 2008. And Never Waste a Good Crisis. So there's plenty of documents out there that have sort of challenged the way that construction have operated and said, can you do better? And there are really two seminal reports from the 90s that have driven a lot of the change agenda within construction. So Michael Latham's report in 1994 about constructing the team, focused on the fact that we're a very fragmented industry and that we need to come together and work together more as a team. And that then was followed a few years later by Rethinking Construction, so John Egan's report, which was essentially his model for how he can actually deliver Terminal 5. It did, and I was involved in some of the implementation on the back of Rethinking Construction in terms of trying to push forward the change agenda within a number of construction companies, and there are a number of companies that cite that report as being a catalyst for them in moving forward and improving. 10 years later, Never Waste a Good Crisis was Constructing Excellence sort of look back at, well, okay, 10 years since the Egan report, what's actually happened? And again, within that document, it's sort of identifying the key things that are wrong with it and coming up with some ideas about what could actually happen. But I think Building magazine sort of encapsulates the key finding from that report, and that actually not a lot had actually changed. So a lot of positivity within the document, but actually what had actually happened, not a lot according to Building magazine. So why do we need the construction strategy? It came out in May 2011, and we'll look at that in a minute. But actually, it came about partly because of a number of reports. The Low Carbon Construction Report came out in October 2010, and it was the first report that was created by the Chief Construction Advisor. So the Chief Construction Advisor, a new post within government the government didn't believe that we needed a construction minister, but it would be good if we actually had a person that could oversee all the different departments and coordinate that. And the first task that Paul Morell was set, he was the first Chief Construction Advisor, was, okay, how are we going to achieve the low carbon objectives for 2050? So, nice bulky report, only 250 odd pages, 55 odd recommendations on what we could do. But one of the key things out of that was actually the government needs to have a clearer strategy on what it wants to do about construction, and it didn't have that. As I say, one of the key things about the Chief Construction Advisor was that it was trying to coordinate across all departments, but whilst that had been created, the Treasury was off doing its own thing in creating the infrastructure cost review. And that was very much looking at how is the government going to be able to fund the work that's required around infrastructure, and where's that money going to come from. So that was created again in December 2010, and a key thing out of that was the government need a clearer construction strategy. So these two documents did actually come together, and they're both referenced within the government's construction strategy, which came out in May 2011. So we're going to focus on this, but I can't sort of not mention Construction 2025, which came out a couple of years later, and to a certain extent, what impact is that having on the delivery of the construction strategy? Well, we can reflect on that later on. But in essence, the Chief Construction Advisor, Paul Morell, served his 2 years, was given an extension, served his 3 years, and Peter Hansford, who had actually been instrumental in writing the infrastructure cost review, took over as the Chief Construction Advisor. His first task was not to implement the rest of the government's construction strategy, it was to actually look at the industrial strategy for construction. So there are 11, 12 industrial strategies that the government wanted to focus on key sectors of industry and say, how are you going to support driving UK PLC? So Peter Hansford's task was actually doing that, and that is where Construction 2025 comes from. But I want to bring us back to the government's construction strategy. We'll look at the detail in a minute, but the one overarching target that it's actually had is to achieve a sustainable 15 to 20% cost reduction of construction by the end of this Parliament. So we're coming up to the end of this Parliament, and we can look and question whether they've actually achieved that towards the end of these slides. But that was the target, and again, the word sustainable has been added in on these slides from the Cabinet Office, but essentially it was very much recognising that it isn't just construction cost, it is looking at the whole life value and the long-term financial health of the construction industry. So how's it going to do this? Well, again, within the strategy there's a number of recommendations, and the key parts of it were very much around looking at how they could push forward on these particular points. I'll leave you to read those there, but essentially a lot of this is driven around identifying and improving data management, information management, improving and informing better decisions. But it's also then looking at how we remove waste, maximise out the buying power of government, recognising that the government do actually have a significant clout within the demand side of the industry, and what can it actually do about improving that. And I think the bottom one is also an important one, about having an integrated client and pushing for supplier teams, minimising process waste again. So it's very much looking at the efficiency side of things. Slide here, and the government's construction strategy essentially identified 13 key areas, partly reflected in what we've said here. So there are 13 themes within that. I'm not going to go through each one of those. But I think it's worthwhile recognising that what I see as significant here is that what the government have actually done is put forward a strategy. It's not a report, as in a lot of the other things about why things are bad. It's actually identified the fact that, yeah, okay, not everything's great, but what we want to do is achieve these things. So it's set about actually looking at challenging the supply side of the industry to look at what they can actually do to improve things. And in that way, the actual construction strategy is 40-odd pages long. 23 of those pages are all about the action plan. So there is a detailed plan aligned to the objectives and the targets for those 13 themes about what can actually be done to improve and drive forward, or to achieve the cost reduction targets that the government want to achieve. And all that is sort of under a governance structure, all reporting into the Minister for the Cabinet Office, led by the Chief Construction Advisor. So we'll come back to this slide in a moment. Again, all this information, there's a website, the government's construction website, so by all means go and have a look at this and see the progress on a lot of this. So this is where I pulled a lot of the information for these slides. So I said we'll sort of relate this back to Cotter's model of change, and there are 8 steps within that model of change. And if we look at the first 2, it's very much about trying to establish a sense of urgency and creating a guiding team. And I would suggest that what the government construction strategy has done is very much try and create that sense of urgency, and then they've created the governance structure and the team behind that to push that forward. So they have developed that vision, and there is a strategy behind it. So I think we can give them a tick in that actually they've started off the process in a way that is actually going to drive change. I'll bring all these 4 up. I think in terms of just bringing it to today, I think there's 4 key, out of those 13 themes, there are 4 key drivers right now. The cost benchmarking, which will look at the targets that they've actually achieved. Obviously the BIM task group has had a lot of money pumped into it, and it's a big focus. But you've also got the government's soft landings and the trial projects, which we're going to look at. So there are a number of key areas. Again, question for you to think about and consider is how much are they integrated, these key streams going forward? How integrated are they? And are they helping and supporting each other to deliver the cost reductions that the government are looking to achieve? So, yeah, government construction there. Right, so we're going to focus on the procurement and lean client task. So we're going to leave BIM, we're not going to talk about that, and we're not going to talk about soft landings. We're going to focus on the procurement aspects of it. And within that, we're very much looking at the work and the report. So you can see there all the various areas. We're focusing and driving down into that particular area in the work that Nick Pollard, who's now Balfour Beatty, led and drove forward. So within the government's construction strategy, 2 key points that I really want to pull out for you. One was the recognition that the government's and client skills weren't good enough. And they needed to address that and identify how they actually improved the way that government itself actually acted as a client and drove construction projects forward. And the other one was looking at, so a strategy, a key point here, is that they recognised that there needed to be new models of procurement. The existing models weren't achieving what the government needed, so there needed to be an approach. And if we sort of look at this one here, seeking a more collaborative, integrated model that nonetheless maintains competitive tension and the ability to demonstrate value for money. So it isn't just about integration and partnering and stuff like that. It's recognising that there still needs to be that competitive tension within the way that work is procured. I think the key statement from the final report that I see is that what they've recognised, that it really understands what drives the adversarial behaviours of the industry, and what they want to do is develop the appropriate solutions accordingly. So it's acknowledging the fact that actually construction is quite fragmented, it is quite adversarial, so what can it do to actually address that and move that forward. And within the report, it wasn't just about procurement routes, they've also talked about the effectiveness of frameworks and cross-government collaboration in procurement. And all that is actually, on top of that, you have the intelligent client. So they're the 4 themes of the procurement and lean client task group report. So if we just focus on the procurement models, key part of what we're really talking about today, so the objective was, how did they set up trial projects on 3 potential procurement models that will enable the cost savings of the 20% to be secured. So it's coming back to the government's construction strategy, it's all about saving 15 to 20%. So how do these procurement routes actually enable that to happen? So the 3 models, we'll touch on this in a little bit more detail, but you've got these three routes. You've got cost-led, 2-stage open book, and integrated project insurance. Again, sort of key principles that they are driving forward here, 4 key principles. Have a standard form, but don't amend it. Don't have liquidated and ascertained damages and retention. Very much have client leadership and develop an effective approach to managing the supply chain. So they're the principles that are underpinning the three routes and the 3 models. If we look at each one of those models in turn, the cost-led, how does it work? Well, again, it's recognising that most clients are going to have a framework already in place. But the approach here is that the client, aligned with the quantity surveyor, is going to set a cost ceiling for that project. And then they're going to, so they've got that cost ceiling, they have an understanding of what that project should cost. Then they're looking to get engagement from a selected number of those suppliers from the framework that they've actually got that are going to look at how that project can be delivered. It says innovate and reduce cost, but you know, how can you get early engagement from the contractors to look at how the project can be delivered, and if that involves innovation, great, but how can they look at the an outline solution that's been put forward and how can that actually be delivered? If their costs come back and they're over the ceiling, then it gives the opportunity for the client to then go back and look at alternative suppliers. Cost-led again, 2-stage open book. Again, you've got a framework of suppliers. The brief here is given by the client, but the competition is very much based on the contractors agreeing a fee and an overhead percentage. And then you're developing the proposals going forward on very much an open book basis. So you agree the management resources and the overhead, and then you look at a more open book approach to the proposals for the delivery of the construction works. And the final one, the integrated project insurance. So quite similar to the 2-stage open book in its stance, but it's actually underwritten and backed by an insurance policy linked to a pain gain share mechanism. I think in terms of just sort of summarising the difference between cost-led and 2-stage open book, the principle here I identified that 2-stage open books has lower bidding costs, potentially enables faster mobilisation, and potentially enables the opportunity for the client to transfer more of that risk to the supply chain on the award at 2nd stage. So they're the 3 routes, and we'll touch on those again shortly when we look at the trial projects. But if we then sort of move on now and have a look at the intelligent client, again, this is another key strand of the procurement report, and it's looking at how the skills are required by clients and how that's going to support the delivery of and cost reduction. Again, it's quite a detailed report. There's appendices here. If you want to find it, you've got to actually dig quite deep. So what I'm going to show you is a summary, but these are basically appendices from the report. And if we look at, there's 10 points here around the principles of the intelligent client. I'm not going to go through these all in detail. They're there. You get a copy of the slides. But in essence, what I'm trying to portray here is that the government have done work that have looked at what do we need to do to improve the capability of our clients, and how do we do that. So this is their views on what they think is the principles of an intelligent client. Not necessarily a term I like in terms of intelligent client. I much prefer to use the word informed client. But what they are saying is that there are a number of areas that the client should have that are going to ensure that they're going to deliver the cost reduction. So how do they actually work with the supply chain, develop that collaborative culture, between the client and the supply chain, because it's recognised that actually a more collaborative approach is likely to deliver a better client outcome for government. Engagement of suppliers, obviously, earlier on, ensuring there's good client leadership, etc. So they're the key issues. And if we have a look on the right-hand side for you, you'll recognise these if any of you are involved in partnering contracts, agreement of mutual objectives, trying to get a commitment to continuous improvement. And we'll touch on the client maturity in a minute. So again, sort of sets out an approach at how you can actually look at working with a client. So if you are working with a client and you want to assess them, then there is a methodology here on how you can actually assess them for their maturity. But there's 6 stages here, so the first 3 very much looking at getting an invitation from not just the client side but also the supply chain side on the collaborative nature between the two, ensuring there's a consistency in the approach. So don't keep chopping and changing the procurement models that you're actually using. Actually, there is a learning process that needs to be gone through for any procurement model, and actually part of the continuous improvement comes from actually learning how each procurement approach works. Very much looking at leadership and environment and basing that on not the adversarial approach, but looking at how you develop the relationships in the right way and understanding all the behavioural aspects of what creates a good team, etc. So, final 3, collaborative culture based on early involvement. So again, it's recognising that actually if we want to get this collaborative culture, it's about engaging the team early on and not just assuming that it's going to work. You actually have to put effort in to ensuring that it's going to happen. So how do you actually work together with the supply chain and develop that relationship management approach? Plenty of guidance on partnering and that can be used here, and we'll look at the capability, maturity, relationship map now. So that map essentially is sort of saying there's 5 levels for a client, 1 to 5. I know it says initial system, these are the words that are taken out of the report, but that's actually essentially saying that's the basic level, working up to a client that is fully optimised. So it's, in that sense, if you go back to the principles, it's recognising and adopting all of those 10 principles and is working at the most optimised approach. Again, I'm not going to go into much more detail on that. There is a lot more information that's available within the appendix of that report. So we talked about procurement routes, the effectiveness of frameworks. Again, there is another detailed report that is looking at the way the frameworks operate. Again, the government have recognised that the way that frameworks have come in, it's not good practice, or good practice has not been adopted a lot of the time. So what can be done to actually address that, and what can be done to improve it? I'm not going to talk on any more detail about frameworks, but again, another one of the appendices within that report gives you a detailed approach to assessing frameworks and what can be done to improve those. Cross-collaboration in procurement. If I'm honest, I'm not quite sure how much progress has actually been made on this. There isn't a great deal of detail on this, but essentially it's recognising that if all the government departments are out buying construction, where's the opportunity for those departments to come together and actually share some of that expertise and knowledge on how the supply chain is operating, and potentially pull some of that buying power together. So that, out of the 4 areas, that's probably the least progressed as far as I understand it. Right, before we move on to the trial projects, let's just sort of have a quick look. So we identified that there was a vision and strategy. Communicate and establish buy-in. Well, essentially that the teams have gone out. They're very much trying to do that, and by pushing forward and getting the reports. So we've seen the lean client reports. There was a BIM task group report, etc. They have very much tried to drive that forward. And again, I would suggest that we can give them a tick in moving that forward and empowering others to take that forward. So I'm going to sort of now, before I bring it all to a conclusion, just have a look at some of the government's trial projects. I'm going to focus on the procurement, but as I say, there are trial projects in relation to BIM, to government soft landings and to client skills. A lot of the client skills can actually be seen within the procurement models as well. So how was all this done? Well, they created a trial projects delivery group, and that delivery group was very much set up to oversee and monitor and measure the benefits of the projects. What again they were recognising here is that all too often there wasn't enough evidence to support the changes that the government were putting forward. So rather than sort of wholesale say we're going to change things, they've endeavoured to go out and sort of do some trial projects, gather some information, understand where things are working, where they aren't working, and as it says there, test the evidence that the proposals and the hypotheses that they put forward within the report are actually going to be achieved. But it was very much sort of focused on driving change from the client and supplier side. How then can we get those lessons learned back in to improve the practicality for the wider rollout? In terms of, this is some of the information. So I was the academic partner on some of the, and still am, on the two-stage open book trial projects. And the way that this has worked is very much sort of having knowledge capture meetings at various stages throughout the project life cycle, working with the project team to sort of capture information at the start of the project, after the brief and the team engagement, decision to build and the build and occupy. So it was trying to capture that information at those particular stages and see how progress had been made. This again, Cabinet Office slide, sort of bringing back and trying to identify what they were trying to do. So it was very much looking at, again, how the cost reduction could come around, looking at what the client needs to do to go to the market with a clear functional requirement, good benchmarks. Again, the should cost approach. We can't emphasise enough that one of the key issues that the government were very much looking at is establishing the benchmarks around what it says there, challenging the cost ceiling and the should cost capability, recognising that actually the government does a lot of work, but it didn't actually have a good solid base of that information that could identify and understand what projects should cost. And again, I sort of want to bring you to this particular part, sort of driving change behaviours. So it's recognising if we're changing culture that we've got to do things that are going to drive behaviours and practices and the way that things are going to work. So common characteristics through these, very much looking at the intelligent client, understanding what the client actually wants, developing that good brief, understanding what it should cost again, and what is the best way to go to market to ensure that they're going to achieve and acquire what they need. Clear pipelines of work, another key thing that they were putting in, and information's been gathered on that to put forward to industry. Looking at how the client can, again, standardise. So one of the key issues within the government's construction strategy and the way that it believes that the cost reduction can be achieved is by looking at improving standardisation in a number of areas, not bespoke all the time. Very much getting client early contractor involvement and again integrating the supply chain to create design and construction solutions. There are a number of trial projects. This is just a summary of a few of them. I think we're up to about 38 of them now. I think that was the latest report that I had. This was some of the early ones. So you can see here that there were a number cost-led, a number in two-stage open book, but just the one on the integrated project insurance. In truth, there's a number of people that have put a significant amount of effort into the integrated project insurance, and are fairly certain that actually what's going to come out is something that's going to be very useful to industry. It will be radically different. The projects haven't actually started yet, but it is moving forward. The work on the cost-led procurement has achieved some success. We're going to look at the two-stage open book and the case studies that have been put forward there, and we're actually going to look at the supply chain management one. Supply chain management group. Have I done that on the next slide? Just no. Okay. So this was the one I was involved in. My role as academic partner is very much coming in, looking and working with the project team, trying to give an independent view of progress and how they've progressed. If we look at the project, it is very much using the PPC 2000 contract within the SCMG. So my role, it was that independent monitor, sort of lead on the data capture and working with Constructing Excellence to produce the report on the lessons learned. All these case studies, there are more than a dozen that are now on the government's website. So this is the Supply Chain Management Group one, and as you can see up there, cost savings achieved. Now, this is actually a programme of work set up with Hackney and Haringey, so around their what is essentially called their Decent Homes initiative. So Hackney Homes and Homes for Haringey, approximately £200 million worth of work. And what we did was actually look at the savings that were achieved from April 12 to May 13. So that's what we were looking. Sorry, no, it was 13 to 14. So for that financial year and what they actually achieved. And the savings that we identified was the 14%, and on top of that, the baseline that the government are using. So the government are using a baseline that's going back to 2009. So they're benchmarking everything against 2009. Procurement had actually taken place in that particular time, and the way that they had set this up, they believed, or not they believed, they achieved an additional saving of 16.5%. That could be the market and various other things that had created that. So all told, there's a potential saving there of nearly 30% on the benchmark that they were using of 2009. That's the case study. Again, the information's there that you can look at. If we come back to the common characteristics that I showed you the slide earlier on, and if we have a look at how that's actually been achieved within the supply chain management group, my view is if we're looking at the intelligent clients, so Hackney and Haringey, yeah, absolutely, they've understood what they want. They've gone through that. They are a reasonably experienced client around this particular market. They've developed that expertise, but this approach has actually led them to better understand what things should cost. Okay, this approach has sort of enabled them to understand below the main contractor what the tier 2, tier 3 costs are, and how they can actually drive cost to that level. So they've changed the arrangement. Previously it would have been going through the main contractor, and the main contractor was almost a shield for what happened beneath. This approach was very much looking at how they worked with the main contractor more as a construction manager, and they could then get visibility and transparency over the work beneath the main contractor. Very much looking at then creating that pipeline of that work, so not just for this year but in future years, and giving the supply chain sort of confidence on what's going forward. And again, so it was looking at the standardisation of the requirement. Again, the key thing for me when I was looking at this was actually the engagement that you were getting from the tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. Actually, they were welcoming the opportunity to engage with the client and understand what the opportunity was to standardise that requirement, and look at what they could do to actually improve their approach in delivering a service to the client, but also look at how they can standardise things for their own benefit. And it was very much a tick in the other boxes as well. So my view, you know, on certainly the supply chain management group is, yeah, you've got an intelligent client, but it's not easy. Okay, it does actually require the client to look at the way that it's working, and it's trying to engage everybody within that organisation to focus on delivery. Very much getting the early contractor involvement works, and what is very much seen is the increased confidence and the reduced risk that comes from that. Whilst I've identified a 14.5% saving, the report, and I've not actually identified the additional benefits, I've put significant benefits there, but the cultural change being one. Actually, the service delivery and the social value benefits that have come through this are also very significant. So improved warranty performance, improved engagement with the tenants and customer satisfaction. All these sort of areas have been a significant benefit. The engagement with setting up Building Lives, which is an award-winning programme, getting apprenticeships involved. Again, the local authority are spending, we've identified there 2 local authorities spending £200 million. Well, they want to see some of that money going into the local authority to employ local people with apprenticeships. They don't want that money just going out the borough. So this approach has very much enabled them to focus on that and look at how they can drive the main contractors and the suppliers to look at engagement of apprenticeships and whatever. Okay, so come back to my key question: will the recommendations for the public sector procurement be adopted by industry? We can debate that. If we come back to where we were at and just looking at the Cotter's model of change, well, yeah, very much looking at empowering others to act. It's saying here, produce short-term wins. Well, I think the trial projects are very much trying to look at that and actually set about achieving those short-term wins. And I'm not here. I am an academic partner. I'm not here advocating or promoting what the government have actually done. But what I am saying is, from what I've seen, I think that absolutely they've been able to achieve the savings on the trial projects that I'm looking at. I'm working with on another trial project. It's not working as successfully. The supply chain management group. There are challenges in creating the culture and all those sort of things. But in terms of the supply chain management group and the evidence that has been put forward, yeah, I would absolutely say that they have achieved those short-term wins. The question, though, sort of is, how do we consolidate those gains, produce more change, and create that new culture? Can we actually do that? If we're looking at this Cotter's model as being the key model out there for understanding how change can be set up and drive forward, the question is, are we actually set to achieve that? Will that actually happen? Within that, so that, you know, a number of issues, I'll throw all these up, I won't dwell on it. But, you know, these are some of the issues that are being faced. You know, supply chain capability, resistance to change within client organisations. As I say, that's one of the key issues within the trial project that I'm looking at the moment. Understanding government soft landings, how that's going to drive forward. Whether you know, academics like me understand what's going on and are going to teach people these new approaches. So, and again, the principle of the intelligent client. How much is that going to be embedded and drive forward change? Okay, so I'm going to just summarise and bring this forward. I was very much starting to look at where the government's construction strategy has come from, what it was setting out to achieve, and as I said, I think it is a strategy. It's different from a lot of the other reports that we've seen in the past, in that it was trying to push the agenda down to the supply chain or the supply side and say, this is what we want, these are our expectations, what can you do in order to meet those expectations and deliver the solutions. Quite a detailed and significant governance structure, and within that you can essentially see the resources that were put forward to support and drive the change. In terms of the procurement and lean client, 4 key parts: the procurement models, the effectiveness of frameworks, cross-collaboration in procurement, and on top of that you've got the intelligent client. And then we've got the trial projects, and we talked through some of those trial projects. But the key question, is it achieving what it needs to achieve? Well, that was the objective by the end of this Parliament. I have been doing some research and I've been doing some work on looking at whether that 15 to 20% cost reduction has been achieved. What we can see here, so this slide's a couple of years old, I've got an update information in a moment, but you can see here that already delivering 72 million in the first year, 447 in the second year, and then it was predicting 650 for 13-14, and this is the number that I'm quite keen to see whether they're actually achieving the 1.2 billion for this financial year. So on that basis, they're very much saying that against those benchmarks of 2009, they are achieving that 15 to 20% cost saving. So I've updated this. This is the government construction cost reductions report from July last year. And these, as you can see here, the 72 million that I just mentioned and the 447, but whilst their target was 650, they're actually reporting that they've achieved a saving of 840. This is just the totals. If you have a look at this particular report, you can see the savings by each government department and how they're actually driving forward on achieving that change. So, on that basis, it is certainly a large number. As I say, I'm quite keen to see what they're going to report this year, whether they're going to achieve that 1.2 billion on the basis of what they achieved last year. I think they will. But don't need that slide, sorry. So if we're looking back, yeah, they are achieving that on the work where they are doing it. So the key government departments, so we are looking at the Department of Health, we are looking at the Ministry of Justice, English Heritage, and the Environment Agency and the Highways Agencies, etc. So a large proportion. So whether it's achieving 15 to 20% on all government spend is not being said. Okay, but certainly on the areas where a lot of work is being done. There is work in the Ministry of Justice are very much leading a lot of this change. Terry Stocks is very much recognising that it's not just about procurement, it's not just about two-stage open book, it is looking at government soft landings, it is looking at BIM. And what Terry Stocks has done within the MOJ is actually significantly influenced the culture within the way that they're operating, and he believes that the progress that's being made within his department and within his department it's got to the point where actually they won't want to be going back to the old way of working. And I think that's my lot. All right. So within the 45 minutes.
Thank you. Would anyone like to ask any questions?